Much is on vaccines, definitely, and not less is on banks, especially in Georgia with two systemic banks and less developed capital markets. Banks are also waiting for the vaccines for sure, but you can get more than that from the interview that the checkpoints had with the head of the Banking Association of Georgia, Alexander Dzneladze. Let's start with a short summary of 2020. What can we see at this point as a COVID impact on the banking sector?
2020 was quite a tough year, not only due to the crisis itself, but also from the uncertainty stemming from that crisis. In March 2020, three main problems showed up before the banking sector. In the first place, this was the safety of their employees. The second was the safety of its consumers, keeping the sustainability and easy access to its services for them. And third, evaluating those risks that would be part of 2020 definitely, but also definitely reaching beyond it. Theoretically, we could say that our belief in March was that the rehabilitation period would kick off from summer already, and that would give us a chance to weigh specific figures by the end of the year and thus have more specific expectations of 2021 going ahead. However, the reality showed us that be a second wave or just a prolonged pandemic, we would have to wait till the first quarter of 2021 to see what are some possibilities of the country to recover its economy and what are some risks before the businesses for the coming years, 2021, 22 or 23. We believe that 2021 will be the year of overcoming those problems that are already on the agenda for the economy and business, and we can be looking at the perspective of full rehabilitation from 2022.
I understand that the uncertainty is still high, but what does the overall tendency show you? Do banks maintain at least minimal profitability, or are we talking about significant losses of the sector due to pandemic?
Some banks are already registering profits, but we are talking about very insignificant changes. The system profitability in total will be close to zero. But here we have to underline that the banking sector managed to maintain its operating profit from month to month, which means that banks are working, functioning, and generating operating profit. Losses mainly stem from the evaluation of those risks concerning credit portfolio.
What are some tendencies here? Do you expect a significantly worsened credit portfolio as a result of COVID impact?
It is early to talk about overdue credits. We have to say very specifically that paying loans will recover fully only from September next year, because credit rescheduling and restructuring was targeted to the companies that have had a specific calendar for repaying those loans, like paying once a year, for example. That's why we'll be evaluating overdue credits at the end of the year. It is yet early to talk in figures.
I understand that at the moment challenges outweigh the opportunities, probably. However, what are some lessons to learn from this pandemic, and what are some opportunities to monitor for future?
It is clear that digital online services have become a new must, and very quick steps should be taken in this direction. Now, what I mean more specifically, because I can say that the banking sector has been using and developing online services for over 20 years already, including plastic cards, internet and mobile banking. But today, quick steps should be taken not only by the banking sector, which has always been ahead in the implementing innovative approaches, even when the proper legislation might not have been still in place or the region might not have had an experience in that sort of innovation. Today, not only the banking sector should be the driving force of this innovation in online services, but the legislation should also be put in place which would ensure the delivery of these services in the form that consumers have also utilized during the last years and to some extent due to pandemic. We see today that delivery service is quite problematic. E-commerce also faces challenges that we did not think of was expensive to implement and so worse. We can say that we have started working on these issues before the pandemic, but today the process is in a very active phase. Be it open banking or protecting personal information, we can say that active phase. One of the main goals of the banking sector in 2021 will be to give the full information to its consumers on types of personal information on an individual basis, and also how this information is protected within banks. This makes us believe that if there are people not using distant services till this day, by the end of 2021 there will be no such people, like the people who had no plastic cards, but today everyone has one.
You mentioned that the banking sector was ahead with innovative approaches, and this phrase triggered the following question. You will agree that many studies and many analysts have highlighted the fact that the growth of the banking sector was also ahead of the growth of the economy. You also mentioned in the very beginning of our conversation that performance of the banking sector would be very much dependent on how the economy performs, and that's true, especially when the two largest banks in the country are systemic banks. What are your thoughts on this interrelation of the recovery?
First, is the first time that the banking sector has outperformed GDP of our country. What does this mean? We can say that the performance of the economy and vulnerability of the economy is directly proportionate with the banking sector, and supporting the banking sector is directly reflected in the economic growth, which is very important. We are not the first one in the world in this direction, and the other more important part, which is assessed differently while talking about the crisis. In Georgia, we practically do not have capital market and alternative ways for the access to capital. The only resource for the capital in Georgia, we can say, are banks. Attitudes here vary significantly. The first is that during crisis, capital markets become very vulnerable and might even intensify the crisis. And the second is that non-existence of capital market increases dependability on the banking sector. So we can say that to some extent, and not very directly, the banking sector mirrors the sustainability of the economy. As I have mentioned before, 2020 was a very difficult year.
Even though this was not a strictly financial crisis, the origin of this crisis was very different, stemming from health issues.
I did not turn into a financial crisis, and here we had several prerequisites for this: support from the government, support from the IFIs, focus on specific projects, and the readiness of the banking sector to overcome this crisis. There were specific recipes for the banking sector in order to stay resilient during the crisis. It was very important that this process was very coordinated. Experts were fully involved in monitoring. Recommendations of the banking sectors were heard and considered, and all of these led to the right recipes to guide the development the way it was guided. If we do not consider lari devaluation, then we can say that the banking sector has not grown, but we can definitely say that the banking sector has met 2021 with the ready attitude to identify new challenges and new opportunities.
Can we say that today such a recipe for the banking sector is opening up the economy and the vaccine? These two are very much interdependent these days.
I want to highlight that even mentioning vaccine has dramatically changed the whole picture, not only in Georgia, but globally, in the direction of expectations. But we have to be careful in hearing what are some timeframes in regards to the effectiveness of these vaccines. It might not be the most popular thing to say, but how businesses adapt to the existing situation and resist the targeted and temporary restrictions is a more realistic expectation, rather than us saying that tomorrow the economy should open up and stay that way.
But what about opening up with rules? Should this approach be so black or white?
Yes, this is exactly what I mean. This does not mean that we should stay at home and stay locked up for good. What is more risky, which risks are followed by which types of impacts? Which impacts are not risky? These are the main questions right now. If we look at the banking sector or many other businesses that have not stopped working for a single day, anytime during the pandemic, you were able to use banking services without restrictions. So what I want to say is that businesses should not depend on such simple rules to, for example, open doors for only 5 consumers at a time, but should adjust structurally its approach to doing business in the same times of the pandemic. And this is not true just for the banking sector, but all the sectors, including public one.
But very approximately, when should we wait for the light by the end of the tunnel?
When we adjust, this is all we can say at this point. Here are 2 main aspects. First, lockdowns cannot be only measure. And second, it is still needed to be seen what time it takes a vaccine to make us forget about the pandemic itself.
It was interesting talking to you, and I'm happy to be representing a business group that has not stopped working for a single day during pandemic. We are on the same page here. Thank you.
Hey guys, stay tuned, subscribe and follow us on BMG.